The day I decided to go hiking alone was one I thought would be just like any other, a simple break from the noise of the city. I packed my bag with the usual essentials: water, snacks, a map, a compass, and a basic first aid kit. The weather was clear and cool, perfect for a long day in the woods. I had picked a trail that was supposed to be moderately difficult, winding through dense forest and rocky terrain, somewhere about 15 miles long. It was the kind of trail that promised a good challenge but nothing too extreme, and I felt confident in my experience to handle it alone. The morning started well. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the trail beneath my boots was soft from last night's rain. Birds sang in the branches above, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush kept me company. I moved at a steady pace, occasionally stopping to catch my breath or take a sip of water. The path twisted and turned through thick clusters of trees, sometimes opening up to reveal steep slopes or rocky outcrops that gave a wide view of the valley below. I loved those moments when I could see the landscape stretch out for miles, feeling like I was standing on the edge of the world. Around midday, I reached a narrow ridge where the trail split. According to the map, both paths would eventually loop back to the main trail, but one was marked as less traveled. The old map was a little faded in places, so I hesitated for a moment before choosing the less traveled route, thinking it might be quieter and more peaceful. I figured it would add some adventure and maybe a bit more solitude. That's when things started to shift. The path grew narrower and steeper. Tree roots twisted across it, making every step a bit more careful. The forest felt thicker, darker. The canopy closed overhead, and the sunlight filtered through in weak, greenish patches. The air grew cooler, damper. The sounds of birds faded until the forest was almost silent, except for the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The peaceful feeling turned uneasy, but I told myself it was just the wildness of the place, nothing more. I pressed on, but after about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen a single marker or signpost. The trail seemed less distinct, almost swallowed by the forest. I stopped to check my map again. The edges were even more faded here, the lines almost smudged. I tried to find my location by comparing the map to the terrain, but everything looked the same: trees, shadows, rocks. The compass needle swung wildly, which made no sense. I put the compass back in my pack and kept going, hoping the trail would become clearer soon. The ground underfoot became uneven and loose, with patches of wet moss making it slippery. I had to hold on to branches and rocks to keep my balance as I climbed a steep incline. My heart rate picked up, but I reminded myself that this was part of the hike. What I didn't expect was the sudden silence that fell completely. No wind, no birds, no insects, just stillness. It was the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like something moving behind me. I stopped and turned around slowly. There was nothing visible through the thick trees, but the sound continued, subtle but steady, like footsteps. I paused, listening, but the noise stopped when I stopped moving. I took a deep breath and told myself it was probably just a deer or some other animal. I moved forward again, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. After a few more minutes, the path disappeared altogether. The ground opened into a small clearing surrounded by dense bushes and towering pines. The sun barely reached through the thick branches above, casting long shadows over the mossy floor. I looked around, trying to spot any sign of a trail. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no worn-down grass. I was lost. I checked my watch. I had been hiking for about 5 hours, and now the sky was starting to turn a dull gray, signaling the late afternoon. I still had a few sips of water left, but not nearly enough to last until I found my way back. My phone had no signal, no surprise, given how deep into the forest I was. Panic started to creep in. I knew the first rule in situations like this was to stay calm and not wander aimlessly. I sat down on a fallen log to think. The forest was silent again. The earlier sounds hadn't returned. I looked at the map and tried to recall landmarks I had passed, but everything blended into the dense, unchanging forest. I decided to head downhill, reasoning that water usually runs downhill and might lead to a stream or river, which I could follow out. Moving carefully, I went down the slope, gripping roots and rocks to steady myself. The underbrush thickened, tearing at my clothes and scratching my arms. Then I stumbled onto a narrow stream. Relief flooded through me. I followed the water slowly, hoping it would lead me to a larger trail or maybe a road. The stream twisted through the forest, and after about an hour of walking alongside it, the sky began to darken. The forest grew colder and damp. My feet were wet, and my clothes damp with sweat and moisture from the underbrush. I tried to keep calm and stay alert, but the creeping feeling of fear was growing. Around me, shadows seemed to stretch longer, the trees looming taller. I noticed broken branches and some strange markings on the trees, scratches that looked deliberate but I couldn't tell if they were natural or something else. As night approached, I realized I had no choice but to find a place to rest. The terrain was uneven and cold, but I found a small, dry patch beneath a large fir tree. I unpacked my emergency blanket, wrapped myself as best I could, and tried to settle down. My mind raced with thoughts of how I would get out of this and whether anyone would come looking for me. The night passed slowly, filled with unsettling sounds, distant cracking of branches, rustling in the bushes. Every noise made me tense. At one point, I heard something heavy moving nearby, but when I looked, there was only darkness and shadows. I stayed still, heart pounding. At first light, I started following the stream again, hoping for a sign of human activity. After hours of walking, the forest finally started to thin. I began seeing trash and discarded cans, signs that people had been here. Soon after, I found a faint dirt road. The relief was overwhelming. I followed the road until I saw a car parked beside it and a man walking toward it. I flagged him down, exhausted and shaken. He gave me water and a phone to call for help. He said he'd been hiking himself and knew this area well. According to him, the trail I had taken was rarely used and known for causing people to get lost. The markings I saw, he explained, were probably from people trying to find their way back but ending up scratching trees in frustration or leaving signs to others. I was lucky to make it out. I realized how quickly things could go wrong when you stray from marked paths and overestimate your ability to navigate wild terrain. The woods are beautiful, but they demand respect and caution. That day, I learned that nature doesn't need to be haunted or mysterious to be terrifying. Just being lost, alone, and unsure of your next step is enough to scare anyone. I promised myself never to take a trail without proper preparation or without telling someone exactly where I was going. The experience stayed with me long after, a clear reminder that the forest is not just a place for adventure, but a place that can turn unforgiving in an instant. The key to survival is knowledge, respect, and keeping calm when everything feels like it's closing in on you. I never thought hosting on Airbnb would become one of the worst experiences of my life, but it did. I run a small place in my neighborhood, a cozy apartment I worked hard to make comfortable for guests. I'm a single woman, and I always made sure to be professional, clear house rules, good communication, and I kept my private life private. But one guest changed everything and made me realize just how unsafe this kind of work can be, and how little support there really is when things go wrong. It started with some strange messages on my personal phone. I don't give out my number to guests, but somehow this guy got it. At first, the texts were casual, just asking about the area or confirming check-in details. But then they started turning weird. He began sending me suggestive comments and asking if I was home alone. I told myself to ignore it, thinking maybe he was just being awkward or stupid, but the messages kept coming. I blocked him a couple of times, but he found ways around it. I was uneasy but didn't want to overreact. After all, people can be creepy online sometimes, and I thought maybe he'd back off once he arrived. When he finally checked in, I kept my distance, didn't want to deal with him more than necessary. But a few days later, I went into the apartment and found a mess. Trash everywhere, empty bottles, cigarette butts on the floor, stains on the carpet, furniture moved around like a party had happened. He had broken one of the chairs, the mattress was stained, and I even found some stuff missing from the kitchen. I felt sick. I'd never had a guest disrespect my home like this before. I took pictures and sent a report to Airbnb. That's when things went downhill fast. I tried contacting Airbnb support, hoping they would help me handle the damage and get some kind of justice. But their response was almost useless. They told me since the guest had already checked out, they couldn't do anything. It's out of our hands now, they said. They didn't even offer to help me with refunds or to hold the guest accountable. I felt ignored and powerless. Then, the harassment didn't stop. Even after he left, the guy kept texting me. Not just on my phone, but I found messages on my social media too. He was trying to find me, asking where I lived, what I was doing. Every time I blocked him, he popped up under a different name. I felt unsafe in my own home. I turned to online communities to get advice, thinking maybe other hosts or women had gone through the same thing. What I found shocked me. Many people said I was overreacting or being too sensitive. Some even said I was inviting this kind of behavior because of the way I dressed, or because I had a suggestive profile picture on Airbnb. They told me I needed to grow a thicker skin, that harassment was part of life if I wanted to do this kind of work as a woman. Reading those comments hurt more than the harassment itself. Instead of support, I found blame. It felt like the whole world was telling me it was my fault, that I was weak, that I had to accept this as normal. But deep down, I knew this wasn't right. No one should feel unsafe in their own home, no one should have to put up with threats and disrespect. I started researching what I could do legally. I found out it's really hard to take action when the company hosting the bookings won't back you up, and when the laws around online harassment and property damage in short-term rentals are weak or slow. The police told me they couldn't do much either without more evidence or direct threats. I felt stuck. The worst part was the way it changed me. I stopped trusting guests. Every new booking made me anxious. I felt like I was constantly watching over my shoulder, afraid this could happen again. I started locking up more things in the apartment, installing cameras in common areas, which I hated because I wanted guests to feel welcome, but I didn't feel safe anymore. I even thought about quitting Airbnb altogether. What's worse is how common this kind of thing seems to be for women hosts. Many single women told me they had stories like mine, but no one talks about it openly. We just pretend everything is fine, because the company wants to sell this idea of a safe and easy way to make money from your home. But the truth is, it's risky, and support is almost non-existent. In the end, I decided to take some steps to protect myself better. I stopped sharing my personal phone number with guests. I updated my profile to be more neutral and less inviting in any way, even if it hurt my bookings. I installed a security system with clear warnings that guests are being recorded in common spaces. I made stricter house rules and started screening guests more carefully. But the scars from that experience didn't go away. I still feel anger and sadness over what happened. The fact that Airbnb support did almost nothing, and strangers blamed me for being harassed, makes me question whether I should keep doing this at all. It's clear now that the system isn't set up to protect people like me, and maybe it never will be. Still, I want to say this clearly, no woman should ever be blamed for being harassed or threatened. No one should have to endure this kind of abuse just for trying to run a business or live their life. And companies like Airbnb need to take responsibility to protect their hosts, not just their guests. For me, the experience was a harsh lesson. I learned that trust isn't given lightly, that being cautious is necessary, and that sometimes, you have to fight just to keep yourself safe in a world that expects you to accept danger as part of the job. I hope more people hear this and understand what it's really like behind the scenes for women like me who try to open their homes, and their lives, to strangers. Because if it's not safe, it's not worth it. I was 17 the first time I realized that feeling scared while walking home alone wasn't normal, but it was something every girl seemed to know too well. I had stayed late at the library, trying to finish a paper for school. The sun had long gone down by the time I stepped out, and the streetlights flickered weakly over cracked sidewalks. The neighborhood wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly safe either, enough empty blocks, abandoned cars, and alleyways where shadows seemed to gather like secrets. I heard footsteps behind me almost immediately. They were slow at first, just matching my pace, then getting louder and closer. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest as I tried not to run, not wanting to make it obvious I was scared, but I couldn't stop the quickening of my breath. I knew what was coming because this was the moment I'd heard about from older girls at school, in hushed whispers, the moment you become aware that you're not invisible, that you attract unwanted attention because of your body, because of your gender. The man behind me was maybe in his 40s, judging by his heavy steps and the gravelly tone of his voice when he finally spoke, low and rough. He didn't ask if I wanted company or directions. He didn't even pretend to be friendly. He told me I looked good, that I should smile more, that I shouldn't be so alone at night. His words were wrapped in something ugly, power and expectation, the idea that I owed him something just for walking on the street. I quickened my pace, trying to keep calm, looking for anything that could help me, another person, a car, a lit house. The fear was so thick it pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. When he reached out and grabbed my arm, I didn't scream. I just pulled back hard and kept moving. I was lucky he didn't follow me further. That was the first time, but it was not the last. Over the years, those moments piled up like stones in my pocket, unwanted touches on a crowded bus, a stranger's eyes burning into me at night, catcalls that came from passing cars, men who whispered in my ear that I looked just right for them. Each one left a mark, not on my skin but on my mind and my spirit, teaching me to be afraid, to carry keys like weapons, to look over my shoulder constantly. In college, things got worse. A professor used his position to pressure female students. You could see it in how he singled out girls who wanted better grades or letters of recommendation. I never spoke up, because who wants to fight someone who controls your future? But I heard stories, girls who felt trapped, stalked, or worse. The worst was the times when power was used against you, when men assumed control over your body like it was theirs to take. That kind of abuse doesn't always come with bruises. It's the invisible kind, the kind that makes you freeze in place, swallow your pride, and obey because you fear what happens if you don't. When I moved to a new city, I thought maybe things would be different. I was older, more aware, more careful. But the harassment didn't stop. The looks from men on the subway who followed me with their eyes. The constant need to explain where I was going when I came home late. The messages on my phone from men who wouldn't take no for an answer. My grandmother's story stayed with me, how in her 70s, she faced a man outside her window in the dead of night. Instead of fear, she met his threat with fierce defiance, mocking him until he fled. Her courage was a light, but also a reminder that women have to carry this burden their whole lives, fighting in different ways against the same threat. I remember a particular night that solidified everything for me. I was walking home from a late shift at a cafe. The streets were quiet, but my mind was loud with every warning I'd ever been given. As I passed a dark alley, a figure stepped out, young, maybe early 20s. At first, I thought he might want help or directions. Instead, he started following me, his footsteps quickening. I could hear him muttering, making crude comments, telling me I should smile, that I looked lonely, that he could make me feel better. My breath caught, and I tried to keep walking faster. I had my keys between my fingers, ready to use as a weapon. I reached the main road and saw a group of people ahead. Relief surged through me, but then he sped up, almost grabbing my arm. I twisted away and ran the last block, not looking back until I was safely inside my apartment. That night, I cried, not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of living with this fear. Tired of knowing that for most women, the question isn't if this will happen, but when. And no matter how many times it does, the responsibility always falls on us, to be alert, to protect ourselves, to stay silent or speak out at the risk of being doubted. But I also felt something else, a fierce determination. To keep living despite the fear. To build a world where women don't have to be scared just because they exist. I started volunteering with a local group that helps survivors, sharing my story, listening to others. There was strength in solidarity, in knowing I wasn't alone. The ending I want to believe in is one where these stories aren't whispered in shame or fear but told loudly, forcing change. Where men understand that harassment isn't a compliment but a crime. Where power isn't used to take but to protect. I don't expect the world to change overnight, but every time I walk home without looking over my shoulder, every time I speak up or help someone else do the same, I feel a little less afraid. That's the ending I hold on to, the one where fear still exists but doesn't win. Where courage, no matter how small, becomes our greatest weapon. I had been hosting on Airbnb for years. I was careful, I always checked my guests' profiles and reviews. I made sure my place was clean and safe, and I took pride in being a superhost. I liked the feeling of control, of knowing who was coming into my home. But one guest changed all that in a way I never expected. It started normally enough. The guest arrived late afternoon. I had left a key in the lockbox as agreed, so there was no face-to-face meeting. That evening, I noticed the guest had stayed out late. I didn't think much of it. People are free to do as they want, and I was glad for the extra money from the booking. The next day, I went about my usual routine. I was alone in the house, as always. I liked the quiet. Around midday, I heard a noise at the door. It wasn't the usual knock or the sliding of the key in the lockbox. It was the sound of the door handle rattling, like someone was trying to open it without a key. I froze. I looked through the peephole and saw the guest. I wasn't expecting this. I never had a guest try to open the door on their own like that. The guest was standing there, staring at the door. I could tell they were agitated. There was something off about the way they moved, slow and tense. I didn't open the door. Instead, I texted the guest through the Airbnb app. I asked if they needed anything, reminded them the checkout time was the next morning. No reply. Minutes passed, then I heard footsteps pacing just outside. The guest was walking back and forth on the porch. I looked through the window and saw them watching the house like a predator. My chest tightened. I felt scared in my own home. I texted Airbnb support immediately. I wrote down everything as clearly as I could, that the guest was outside my house, acting strangely, trying to open the door without permission, that I was alone and a woman, and that I felt threatened. I asked them what I should do. I told them I planned to call the police if the situation didn't resolve by noon. As I waited for their reply, I locked all the doors and windows again, checked the security cameras I had installed. The guest was still there, still pacing, their face sometimes pressed close to the glass like they were watching me. The feeling of being watched made my skin crawl. I realized I couldn't stay calm forever. Airbnb replied within minutes. They said they were contacting the guest and would get back to me. I appreciated the quick response, but I didn't feel any safer. I called Airbnb's emergency line and told them everything again, verbatim. The agent on the phone assured me they were escalating the case and urged me to call the police if I felt in danger. By now it was nearly noon. The guest still hadn't left. They refused to respond to messages. The tension built with every passing minute. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I told them exactly what was happening, how the guest was refusing to leave and had tried to open my door, that I was alone and felt threatened in my own home. Within half an hour, 2 police officers arrived. They approached the guest, who finally stepped back and started gathering their things. The officers told the guest firmly to leave immediately. I watched from the window, relief flooding over me like cold water. The guest left without further incident. After the police left, I took photos of the mess the guest had left behind: trash scattered in the yard, cigarette butts on the porch, damage to the doorframe from trying to force it open. I documented everything, including the €150 fine I was later charged because of the guest's violation of local regulations. I wrote a detailed review on Airbnb, sticking strictly to facts. I explained that the guest refused to leave at checkout time despite being given an extra hour, that they had tried to force entry, acted aggressively, and made me feel frightened in my own home. I didn't use emotional language or exaggerations. I just stated the truth, to warn other hosts and protect myself. After this experience, I changed my hosting practices. I installed more security cameras, added a secondary lock I could control remotely, and updated my guest rules to forbid any behavior that might make me uncomfortable. I also made sure I had a clear line to local authorities and Airbnb support. This whole situation taught me that even with all the precautions, hosting strangers can be dangerous. You never truly know what kind of person is behind the profile picture. And feeling safe in your own home is not something you should take for granted. The guest's behavior was terrifying. It broke my trust in the platform I'd relied on for years. But the clear steps I took, contacting Airbnb immediately, calling the police when necessary, documenting everything carefully, helped me regain control. I made sure I was heard, and that the guest faced consequences. It ended with me standing in my quiet home again, the police report filed, the damage repaired, and a sense of security slowly returning. It wasn't just about money or bookings anymore. It was about my right to feel safe inside my own doors. That experience changed the way I see hosting. It's a reminder that no matter how careful you are, you must always be ready to act quickly and protect yourself. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't some ghost story or fantasy. It's the reality of being vulnerable in your own home. And knowing you have to fight back to take your space back. I never thought a simple stay at an Airbnb could turn into one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. I was traveling alone through Denmark, making my way from city to city, staying in small apartments and homes I found online. Most of the places were nice, clean, cozy, and with that warm, Scandinavian, hyggelig feeling I had come to appreciate. But this one near Copenhagen was different. I picked it mainly because it was cheap and I was only going to sleep there. I didn't expect comfort, but I didn't expect the nightmare either. The place was old, with a narrow staircase leading up to the bedroom right under the roof. The ceiling was low, sloping, forcing me to stoop as I walked around. The walls looked worn and the furniture was basic and mismatched. There was no effort to make it inviting. The smell was faint but stale, like a mix of old wood and dampness that hadn't fully aired out. I told myself it was fine. I'd just be here one night. When I finally got ready for bed, I noticed a small spider on the ceiling near the corner of the room. I froze for a moment. I've always hated spiders. Even the tiniest ones make my skin crawl. But I thought, it's just one spider. It won't bother me. I ignored it and lay down, pulling the thin blanket over myself. The ceiling was so close I could almost touch it if I stretched my hand up. As I lay there, starting to drift off, I suddenly felt a light tickling sensation on my arm. My heart jumped. I flicked the light on quickly, and there it was, a spider, bigger than the first, crawling slowly across my skin. I slapped at it hard and crushed it. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When I looked up at the ceiling, my stomach dropped. The whole ceiling was covered in them, hundreds of spiders, some tiny like pinpricks, others larger and more visible. They were spread out in patches, as if the entire roof was a massive web filled with moving creatures. Their legs were twitching, and I could see them slowly inching forward, almost like they were waiting for me to move so they could crawl down. I felt frozen. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. I didn't want to breathe too loudly or move too fast, afraid I'd trigger a wave of spiders falling onto me. My eyes darted across the ceiling, tracing the clusters that shifted gently, some disappearing behind beams and others emerging from the cracks in the ceiling's wood. I tried to think clearly. There was no way I could stay in that bed. I didn't want to sleep on the floor, the thought of more spiders coming at me was unbearable. The bedroom door led to a small hallway, and downstairs was the living room with a sofa. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and moved slowly and carefully to the living room. The ceiling was higher there, and I hoped it was safer. I curled up on the sofa, clutching my blanket close, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak from the old house made me tense. I kept flashing the light across the ceiling and walls, watching for any signs of spiders. The room felt cold, the air thick and heavy. I was exhausted but terrified, knowing I wouldn't be able to rest properly. Morning couldn't come soon enough. I made a quick plan. I wasn't going to stay in this place another night. The spiders, the smell, the tight, low-ceilinged room, it all made me feel unsafe. After a few hours, I packed my things quietly and left the Airbnb without bothering to tell the host. The thought of being trapped in that room again was unbearable. Outside, the fresh air felt like a relief I didn't realize I needed so badly. I found a nearby cafe and sat with a cup of coffee, calming my nerves. The spider nightmare lingered in my mind, making my skin itch even hours after I'd left the room. When I thought about why this happened, I realized the house must have been neglected. The roof was probably full of cracks and old beams, perfect for spiders to build nests. The dampness inside the walls gave them a safe, hidden home. No one had cleaned the ceiling or checked for infestations. It wasn't just a bad experience, it was a real health concern. That night, I found a different place to stay, something a bit more expensive but safe and clean. I finally slept soundly, but the memory of the spiders crawling on the ceiling, the feeling of them dropping on me, stayed with me. It made me realize how important it is to read reviews carefully and trust my instincts, even if the price is tempting. The whole experience taught me something about traveling alone. Sometimes, the smallest things can become your worst fears. No matter how much you plan or prepare, there's always a chance something will go wrong. But it's how you react and protect yourself that counts. I'm sharing this now because I know others might face similar situations. Not every Airbnb is perfect, and sometimes, cheap comes with a cost you don't want to pay. So if you ever find yourself in a place that feels off, especially with creepy crawlies, don't hesitate to leave early. Your peace of mind is worth more than any discount. Since then, I always check the ceiling and corners carefully when I arrive somewhere new. And I've learned to trust that gut feeling, no matter how small it seems. Because in that low-ceilinged room in Denmark, with spiders everywhere, I realized that sometimes, the things you fear most aren't stories or legends, they're real and right above your head, waiting quietly to crawl over you in the dark. I had the code for the electronic door lock, given to me by the rental company, so entering the house wasn't a problem. We had stopped at the grocery store on the way, picking up things that needed refrigeration first, so we carried those bags in carefully. The door shut quietly behind us, and for a moment, I stood still, glancing around the entrance hall. It looked normal enough. But then I noticed the fridge. When I opened it, it was already filled with food. Not just a little leftover stuff, but a fridge packed with fresh groceries, leftovers, containers of homemade meals, even a bunch of unopened packages. The whole thing looked lived in. I paused, feeling a bit uneasy. I looked over to the kitchen counters and shelves. More food was spread out there, boxes of cereal, fresh fruit in a bowl, jars of sauces, bottles of drinks. There were personal items too, an open mail envelope with letters peeking out, a pair of reading glasses left on the counter, a newspaper folded and left untouched. It looked exactly like someone was living here, just going about their day, not expecting anyone else. I called out softly, just a quiet, "Hello." but no answer came back. The silence felt heavy. My partner and I started walking around the rooms, glancing into the living room, the bedrooms, the bathroom. Everything was normal on the surface, clean, but lived in. Clothes hung in closets, towels folded neatly in the bathroom. On the desk in the study, there were piles of papers, a calendar open to this month with some dates circled. There was a toothbrush in the bathroom, a half-used tube of toothpaste. I kept looking around, trying to understand how this could be. We were supposed to be the first ones to stay here since the owner left, right? But nothing looked like it had been packed up or cleared out. It looked like someone had just stepped out for work and hadn't come back. I had this sinking feeling, like we just walked into someone's private space without permission, even though we had the code. I hurried back toward the door, suddenly worried that maybe the neighbors had already noticed us and were about to call the police on us for trespassing. My heart was pounding. I pulled out my phone and called the rental company. I explained what I'd seen, the fridge full of food, the personal things all over the place, how it didn't look like a typical rental ready for guests. The person on the other end reassured me in a calm voice. Apparently, the house owner had said he was going to clear things out before renting the place again, but that hadn't happened yet. They told me not to worry, just push things aside and make do. That it was normal for some belongings to still be there sometimes. They made it sound like nothing to be concerned about, so I forced myself to calm down. We set to work clearing some space. There was a big closet near the kitchen, crammed with boxes and bags. As we started sorting through the mess, I found something that stopped me cold, a couple of half-used bottles of cancer medication. The label was clear enough to read, prescribed for stage 4 cancer treatment. Next to the bottles was a folder with papers inside, medical bills, hospital notices, letters from a cancer treatment center. The dates went back months, and some of the notes mentioned hospice care. I didn't want to keep reading, but I couldn't stop. We found more paperwork in other rooms, some legal documents, a will, notices about life insurance, and what looked like funeral arrangements. Everything pointed to the owner having been seriously ill, and the documents made it clear that the cancer had progressed. There was a letter from a funeral home in a northern state, a place far from here. It seemed the family had arranged to have the body transported there, where his wife had been buried years earlier. The thought hit me hard, the owner was almost certainly dead. His children must have taken care of his burial without ever coming here to clear out the house. Suddenly the whole scene made sense. The food in the fridge, the personal items left behind, the house still full of belongings. It wasn't a rental ready to welcome guests. It was a house abandoned in the middle of someone's life, frozen at the moment when they left for the last time. I imagined the owner here, living his final days in this house, surrounded by his things, and then his family stepping in to handle what they could from a distance. We spent the rest of the afternoon slowly moving things out of the main rooms, making space for ourselves without disturbing too much. The house had a quiet sadness hanging in the air. It was like stepping into a story unfinished, a life cut short and left behind. The emptiness felt heavy, not because it was empty, but because it still held so much of someone's existence. Before we left that evening, I locked the door behind us and looked back one last time. It was just a house, but it held all the traces of a life that had ended quietly, without ceremony or notice to strangers like us. The rental company still hadn't done their part, and I knew I'd never see a house like that again, the way it was left, caught between life and whatever came next. Driving away, I kept thinking about the invisible line between what people leave behind and what the world moves on from. The house was full of memories no one had touched, frozen moments waiting to be cleared away. I realized sometimes, places like that aren't haunted by ghosts or stories, they're haunted by reality itself, the weight of what's lost and forgotten in plain sight. I hope the family eventually came back to settle things properly. But for now, the house stood there, a quiet reminder that life ends in ways no one expects, leaving behind things no one else knows how to deal with. We never saw another tenant move in after us, and when I called the rental company again weeks later, they finally admitted they had to pull the listing. The house stayed empty, waiting for the day someone would come and finish the job the family left undone. I arrived in Paris with high hopes of finding a room to rent somewhere in the city, somewhere I could call home for a while. Before that happened, I booked an Airbnb to stay in for a few days while I went to interviews and checked out different neighborhoods. The apartment I got wasn't great, but I thought I could put up with it for a short time. It was on the older side, the floors creaked loudly every time I moved, and the bathroom was barely usable, the shower was old and leaked, the sink barely drained, and the lighting was dim and flickering. But those things I could tolerate. What I couldn't stand was everything else about the place. Next door, the apartment was being renovated. Every morning, right on the dot at 7 a.m., the drilling and hammering started. It didn't stop until 6:30 p.m. every day. The noise was relentless. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was temporary. But day after day, it wore me down. The loud pounding and buzzing vibrations felt like a constant assault on my nerves. I couldn't relax, I couldn't concentrate. It was like the workers were drilling right into my skull. Even my earplugs barely helped. The walls were paper thin, the windows old and single-paned, so every sound leaked through without mercy. And then, on top of that, the couple living above me had a newborn baby. The apartment's ceiling was so thin that I could hear the baby's cries as clearly as if they were right in my room. The screaming started in the early hours of the morning and sometimes didn't stop for hours. The baby's wails pierced the quiet when I was trying to sleep, leaving me exhausted and drained every day. I had never felt so trapped in a place that wasn't even mine. Despite all this, I tried to focus on the reason I was there, finding a better place to live. After a few days of interviews, I finally found a room to rent in the city. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than that nightmare of an Airbnb. That afternoon, I came back to pack my things and get ready to move the next day. But something was wrong. As soon as I walked in, I noticed my suitcase was not as I'd left it. The clothes inside were tossed around, as if someone had rifled through them in a hurry. My heart started pounding. I immediately checked the secret compartment I'd made in the lining of my suitcase, where I'd hidden an envelope with extra cash, €300 I had set aside for emergencies. It was gone. My stomach dropped. I looked around the apartment frantically, hoping I'd just misplaced it. But no. It was definitely gone. What was strange, though, was that nothing else was touched. My laptop, worth over $2,000, was sitting right on the table in plain sight. My phone, camera, and other valuables were all exactly where I left them. Only the cash was missing. That's when I realized someone must have had a key to the apartment. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. I was careful to always lock the door behind me every time I left, and it was locked when I returned. I hadn't lost my key, so the only conclusion was that someone with a key let themselves in, someone who knew the apartment well enough to avoid touching anything but the cash. I called the host immediately. At first, she insisted that it couldn't have happened, that maybe I'd lost the money or put it somewhere else. I didn't accuse her outright, but I was furious. The way she brushed off my concerns made me feel like she didn't care at all. After a while, she agreed to come by the next morning to inspect the apartment. By then, I had already decided to move out and take the room I'd found. When the host arrived the next day, she did a quick once-over. She checked the door lock, looked around the place briefly, but never apologized or offered to refund any of the money I lost. Her attitude was cold and dismissive. It felt like she was protecting someone or just didn't want to take responsibility. The whole experience left me feeling exposed and powerless. I couldn't believe that someone I trusted with a rental key could just walk in and steal from me without any consequence. I packed my bags and left that apartment with a mix of anger and relief. I was glad to be out of that noisy, uncomfortable place, but the theft still gnawed at me. It wasn't just about the money, it was the violation, the feeling that someone had invaded my space while I was away, knowing exactly where to find what they wanted. The next place I moved into was much better. The people I lived with afterward weren't perfect, but at least they weren't dishonest or disrespectful. They didn't steal from me or ignore my concerns. I found a little peace there, a sense of safety I hadn't had in that Airbnb. Even now, weeks later, I think about that time in that apartment in Paris. The noise, the restless nights, and the betrayal. It made me realize how important it is to trust where you stay, to feel safe in your own space. That apartment was a lesson in how something as simple as a place to sleep can become a source of fear and frustration when the people involved don't care or worse, take advantage. I still remember the sound of the drilling, the baby's cries echoing through the ceiling, and the terrible feeling of coming home to find someone had been inside, rifling through my things while I was gone. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't shadows or ghosts but real people and real actions that break the trust we try so hard to hold on to.